Hi guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video for Honeybee Stamps. Today we are going to be using some lovely layers. I have the bird cage, the lovebirds. This is the Sweetheart Roses vintage rose background. This is my set, which is Blooming View. We're only using the sentiment out of this. I did not end up using the hearts, and the other set of sentiments I stamped on the inside, so I didn't even show it to you, and I apologize for that. We as card makers make cards because we enjoy the process. It brings us joy. We like learning new things. We like creating. And for me, that is my job. But every once in a while, I get to make a card that I have a genuine need for. It isn't just for the making. It is for the making of somebody specific in mind. And so when I sat down to make this card is for my parents' wedding anniversary, which they have already received, so it's safe to share with you. But I made very specific choices that were very personal to them. So that is how I got the pairing of the items. I am going to be doing lots of Copic coloring today. I am using the little colored cardstock kind of cheat for that to make it go a little bit faster. The bird cage, I'm cutting out of a gold metallic, but then the pieces that back the accent pieces, I'm using a dark brown as well as for the perch. And then I'm going to use what is this? What would you call this? A Tiffany blue? No, it's not a Tiffany blue. It's like a light tealish blue. Not really sure what to call it. And then I'm using a coral. Eventually, even though I'm choosing much lighter cardstocks, this is actually going to be a card that has much richer colors. But starting with that lighter cardstock is a little bit of a cheat. Now, the vintage rose background is great. Here, what I'm doing is I'm just using the die tool. If you don't have one of these, they're so handy to have, especially if you have dies that have more intricate pieces, because I can just go in and pop out all these little intricate details that make the birdcage so pretty. But the vintage rose set is meant to be used as a background, and the Sweetheart Roses have their own kind of like urn style pot as well. I'm not going to use them as they're intended today at all. So here, this is me just putting together the bird cage because I'm not doing any extra shading to it. I'm just gluing the pieces together. Here, I did miss adding a little bit of glue to that furthest right-hand point, so I couldn't get it to stick all the way down. So just something to note when you're, gluing your items together, make sure that you're adding glue to the parts that will actually touch. Pro tip, right? Pro tip, put the glue where you actually need it to stick. But so that little bit of dark brown will just give us some contrast from the metallic of the cage. And I specifically chose gold. While my parents' wedding bands are silver, my mother prefers yellow gold. And so that is how I made the choice for the bird cage. And that is all done, and I can just set that to the side. Here, I just wanted to show you, I am going to put the perch in front because I want the birds to be a good portion of my focal point, but you could also put it behind so that the birds look like they are inside the cage. And then in addition, they have a door die as well. I did not use that. So once I got all my die cutting done, I like to go through, I put all of my die cuts in a little cup, and then I just like to go through and sort them. All of the lovely layers, as well as these vintage or these bold backgrounds, have layering guides. And so I pull all of those up right from the Honeybee website. If you go in and look for the product, like if you typed in lovebirds, they would have the product where you can download it. If you so choose, you could print them out and then you could just put them with your set and you would have them. I just pull them up online because I sit at an L-shaped desk and my laptop is on one side and the part where I create is on the other. So it's nice and easy to do that way. So here, if you've never seen these bold backgrounds before, they're really, really great because they fill up your whole A2 size card. I recently did one where I kind of deconstructed the plumeria bold background. But this one, what I'm doing is I'm just going in, and each one of these flowers, I think you cut the large one, like the pieces for the large one twice, the pieces for the small one like 2 or 3 times, and then the pieces for the bud like 2 or 3 times. But I'm not filling up a whole background. I want to use them separate of the background, which I can very easily do because it has lots of really pretty leaves in here. So I picked out which section I was going to be cutting out, and then I just colored those. Now, I knew that I wanted my lovebirds to be blue. Most of the time when you see lovebirds, they're kind of like the greenish yellow ones, but they actually have some that are called Fisher lovebirds, which are blue, and some of them are masked, meaning that they have a black face, and some of them have a white face. I chose to color them blue with a white face, and the reason I made this choice is because both my parents have blue eyes, and blue is my mom's favorite color. So again, it's just something that's very personal to them in making my color choices. So I'm going in over top of this lighter blue, and I'm adding shading with with the navy color family. So this is a B95, 97, and 99 in Copics. But basically, I fully intend to use some color glazing to make the leaves a little bit more green, but still read really nicely to play with the blue. So in order to do that, I'm using a blue base. Now, I personally think blue leaves are beautiful, and I think there's no reason why you couldn't use them. And blue and coral, I love together. Those were my wedding colors. My parents had a rainbow theme. But anyway, I'm coloring up those leaves, and then for the Sweetheart Roses, it gives you this base, which already has many leaves on it. But then in addition to that, you can cut extra leaves to add extra dimension. So I'm going to be using both of them, and I colored them the same exact way, starting with my darkest color, working out to my lightest color. And then I'll be able to clip these apart so that I can use them to make my own arrangement. Because as we all know, this hobby is certainly an investment. So we like to try to get as much out of them as we can and using them different ways. So here I'm just looking to double check and make sure that I'm happy with the color or with the flower selection I've made. And then forgive me, I forgot to zoom in. I'll do it in just a minute. But I told you I wanted to bring in kind of more green. So what I'm doing is I'm glazing over. First I started with a YG03. Then I went in with a G07. I liked the G07 better. Then I tried a BG75. It was a little too gray for me, but I liked the blue-green a lot more. And so I'm going to use a BG18, which will be a little bit brighter. They have a little less gray in it. And so when I shaded my leaves, ultimately what I decided to go with was the G07 and the BG18. And then I am going to work that into my leaves so that I have a lot of variation of color. Some of them are more green blue, some of them are more blue blue. But either way, they definitely, read as leaves. So when I put the green down, I did go over top of it with the blue green. And this just shows you like how many different ways you can kind of glaze or, layer your colors to get different looks that can make it work a little bit better for the design that you have in mind. And I'm going to do the same thing over here to this background because I fully intend to cut out portions of these leaves. The only thing that I will just caution you on is if it's a free leaf, like this one over here in the kind of top left where there's nothing connecting, just that part that connects to the stem, just be careful because when you're adding ink, you are adding moisture and it can make your paper a little bit more likely to tear if you don't have a good solid weight paper. So just something to keep in mind. If you have that, you might want to just hold it with your finger. So now that I have my leaves covered, I'm going to use these same blues to go in and color my birds. So I wanted them to be the same but different. So I'm using the same color scheme. I'm just making one a little bit darker than the other. And because these are lovely layers, they do have, different layers. So I like to lay them kind of on top of each other, use my lightest color to find my shadow. I also make sure that I always color the edges. So that way, when you're putting them together, you're not seeing like this stark white edge or, as we'll see later on, like a stark coral edge. For the wings, there's not a whole lot of real estate here. So for the sliver of a wing that goes on the right-hand side, I just went with the darkest color. For the one that's a little bit larger, I did add a little bit more shading. Here, I'm going to go in and I'm going to mark where the head meets the body with a C1 because remember, I'm doing my face as white. So I want to make sure that I'm not getting, color where I don't want it. This is going to be my little bit of a darker bird. So I'm bringing in lots of darker color up from the bottom, and then I'll add little bits into the embossing that's already there. Now remember, these lovely layers, one of the reasons why they're so great is because they do all of that embossed detail for you. So it's really easy to follow along to see where you want to add your shading. So for this one, I added a lot more dark, and then I'm going to kind of bring that up around the head. Same thing for the actual like head layer. I'm going to add just a little bit of dark blue kind of along the bottom, and then my lightest color, and then I will bring in a C1 and a C3, which are cool grays. Blue is a cool color, so these will work really nicely together. And I will use this to add shading kind of underneath the eye as well as underneath the beak, like where, it would be like sitting on top of its shoulder, the way that its head is turned. And then I will add just the C1 just to blend those out. I will leave white. Now, in doing my research, I noticed that these Fisher lovebirds do have a little bit of a paler beak. So I went with some lighter yellows that Y21 is not as bright, and then blended that out with a Y11 so that they're nice and light. These also have the little feet, and I colored those with the same two colors, but I'm going to be honest with you, by the time all is said and done and I'm done building my card, I forgot to put on their little talons. I don't think you'll notice it if I didn't point it out, because there's so much going on in the card. But I did just want to add, like you would be able to add your feet wherever you wanted them to be perched. So now for this one, I'm being a little bit lighter handed with the darkest color. I'm just putting it in the embossed areas. I'm not adding a bunch of darkness up from its belly. And then I will add in a B93 and a B91. So I want to make sure I'm leaving some lighter areas in between these feathers, like in between the embossed feathers, because that's going to help give us some dimension and help the feathers look like it's layers of plumage kind of laying on top of one another. I will be honest with you, because you guys know I believe in transparency. I grabbed the 91 before I grabbed the 93. So I have to go back and kind of blend these out and then go back in with the 91. So they kind of got blended twice, no big deal. And then once I get my bird together and I can, like he's glued together, or I could just lay the layers on top, I can make any adjustments for the shading that I need to. This particular bird has its head down and to the left because it tucks behind the other birds. They look like little snuggly lovebirds. So I will make those final adjustments of color once I have her all glued together, but everything else was pretty much just the same as the other one. I used that C3 to shade around the eyes, around the beak, and then blended that out with the C1, leaving the top of the head white. For these ones, I'm going to show you the vintage roses and the sweetheart roses, but I'm only going to show you one of each because it is a little time consuming to color your die cuts. So basically, I picked 4 colors, which are my normal colors that I would use to color something red. Why did I choose red? My dad loves my mom in red. Like if he has a choice in what nail polish color she wears, if she asks his opinion, it's always going to be red. My mom is blonde haired, blue eyed, fair skinned. So red does look, just beautiful on her. Well, she's beautiful all the time, but, it's a good color for her. And their song is Lady in Red by Krista Berg. So that is how I chose the color of my roses, as kind of a nod to their song. Once again, just, something that thinking about my mom and dad, something that I associate with them. So here I'm doing the same thing that I was doing before. I'm laying the layers on top of each other and I'm marking it. Now you may ask yourself, Kelly, what are you doing with that R32? That color is lighter than your cardstock. You're not even going to be able to see it. And you would be correct. What I'm using it for is to blend out that R35 so that I make sure I don't have any harsh edge lines and everything just kind of blends softly right into that cardstock. And I know that these look crazy when we're coloring them. Like they don't look like they should even be kind of pretty. It just looks wild together. But I beg of you to trust me, because once we put all the pieces together, it really does create a beautiful dimensional rose. The vintage roses do have centers for two of the flowers. So that is one of the big differences between that and the sweetheart roses. The sweetheart roses have no centers. They're all just one color. Or you could cut them out of white. I've done that a bunch of times. You guys probably seen it a bunch. But you could cut them out of white and then color them whatever color you would like. This, using the colored cardstock as a base, is just a fast little way that we can get color. Plus, it's a little less overwhelming when your cardstock is already colored to use a darker color. It's not as scary because you already have color in the cardstock. So this is just to show you how this will layer up and what the center will look like. I did use the same colors that I used for the beak for the center. I just added a YR24 to make it a little bit darker. And then this will be the largest rose from our vintage set. For these pieces that are kind of the edges curling up over itself, I didn't add any shading to these at all. I just used the coral color cardstock so that they would be the lightest portion. This is the like the middle-sized flower from the vintage rose bold background. And this one also has a center as well. I colored it the exact same way. I just kind of wanted to show you how the pieces layer up and with that little center in the middle. And then there's a bud, and the bud is super easy and quick to do. You just lay the greenery down on top and trace it. So now we're going to move on to the sweetheart roses. These we're going to do the same way. They are on a smaller scale because sweetheart roses obviously are smaller. So don't worry so much about making sure, about your shading, because some of these layers have very little real estate to shade. So it's much more forgiving when you have multiple layers like this, because the die cuts are pretty much doing all of the work. The shading is just adding a little bit of an enhancement to, the overall look of it, and also for me making it the same color as my vintage roses so that I can use them together in the same piece. But because there is such a small amount of real estate, it really is very forgiving for where you put your shading. A lot of these I'm only adding just a line of shading, so you don't need very much at all for like the top 2 or 3 layers. I'm not even using that darkest color, the R59. I'm just using the R29. And then once we start to get into kind of like the deeper, darker, more layers, roses have so many layers that kind of unfold as it blooms, then I will go back to using the R59 as my darkest color. But again, I'm only adding a line of it and then I'm blending it out with those other colors. So thinking about this, my parents have been married for 46 years. And let's go back to like why this makes me think about this. So I told you guys recently that my nephew is going to dentist school. It's kind of a funny story. He's going to dental school. He's now living in Tennessee on his own apartment, and he called his mom and was like, I'm making spaghetti, but I don't have like the little meat masher, like the little meat thing to break up the meat. And my sister started laughing and she was like, get a fork. And he was like, what? And I was cracking up. I was like, oh, they're adorable when they don't know how to be poor. Because you're so used to having like all of the luxury items like a meat masher, which is funny because I own one and I never think to use it. I should probably send it to him because I still use a fork because that's what I used my whole life to break up ground beef. So the reason that it makes me think of it is because like my parents, when they got together, they were broke. Like they did not have anything. I mean, my mom made dinner on a hot plate. They, at one winter, like they had their cooler that sat outside in the snow because they couldn't afford a refrigerator. They had one car that worked and it would freeze in the wintertime. We live in Ohio. It would freeze in the wintertime. So they worked opposite shifts. And if there was any downtime in between them, they would have to like pop open the trunk, hang a garage light in there and cover it with a blanket to keep the engine warm. Like they were broke when they got together. And to see the life that they were able to build together, the life that they were able to give my sisters and I is just nothing short of miraculous. Like I could not be more proud to be their daughter. The work ethic that I have, my moral compass, like that is 100% from my parents, from teaching me those things. And I am blessed enough to be able to teach them to my children. And they're like the best grandparents. Let's talk about this. Here I'm just showing you how it would go if we were using it how it was supposed to be used. We're not going to do that though. We are going to now glue our little birds together and you'll see me, adjust any of the shading. And then we're going to get into kind of the layout and how I went through a couple of different versions, to be honest. And I'm not sure that I left them all in, but I did leave, I think, at least one in so that you can see kind of what my process was. And then we'll get to the final part of the building of the card. But anywho, back to I guess mini story time. They didn't have a lot, and because they didn't have a lot, and I think this is true for most parents, they wanted to give their kids more than they had, which they did. But they also, like I, had chores and allowance. I had a job when I was 14 years old. Like there were things that we were blessed enough to do, but we also had a very healthy understanding of we're able to have those things because our parents worked for them. And my dad, instead of doing the little teeny tiny black eye, I used one of the, I think it's the obsidian rhinestones. I used that for their eye. But my parents had 3 daughters. And so your first relationship with a man as a daughter is your father, right? And that's what you kind of compare everybody else to. And this is true for me and both of my sisters, because we've had extensive conversation about it. Goals is just finding somebody to love us like my father loves my mother. Sorry. Now that I have gotten myself together a little bit, that was the goal in finding somebody to share our lives with. My whole life growing up, my dad would always tell us anything extra you have because your mother works. And that's true. They both worked. They both worked blue collar jobs. They built this life for us, for now that our children, from nothing. And to say that I admire them and respect them is like the words just fall short. I am very blessed to have the family that I have, to be raised by the parents that I have. So in making their anniversary card, I wanted to make it very personal to them. So now everything is kind of cut out. We're working with the different pieces. That white piece that you see is actually from the spring layering set. I thought that I was going to do a white background. It ended up feeling a little bit like kind of lackluster. So once I kind of have everything laid out, I am going to switch the background. But here's where we're using our dies quite a bit differently than they're intended. We're going to cut these apart. So going in and, trimming them off where, like for these ones over here, they have quite a few stems and leaves that are already put together for us. And rather than create our own, we're going to use what Honeybee has already taken the time to put together really beautifully. And then we're just going to trim them apart to create our own, like bouquet or swag, or, however you want to put it. So I'm just going in and I'm trimming them off. If there's two leaves that meet together, I am making sure to trim it so it looks like it's a full leaf. I just don't want that, like cut off edge. Here, I apparently glued my rose on wrong and I needed to fix that. So fixing that. And then that larger rose down there in like the bottom right-hand side, not the one with the center, the other one, that one just kind of sits in the stems. Here, I'm trimming off this rose bud. I love the way that the leaves looked, but I wanted it to be a little bit of a tighter cluster. So I'm just going to trim that off and then kind of retach it further down the stem. All of these little free leaves that we have that are extras from the Sweetheart set, I am, like we colored, I'm just tucking them in there. For the sentiment, I am using the same navy cardstock that I'm going to be using for the background, and I am stamping that happy anniversary. Like I said, that's part of the Blooming View set. So I'm stamping it after heating it with my anti-static tool in white with our Brilliant White pigment ink, and then heat embossing that with a white detail. This is definitely more of a finer script, so that detail embossing powder is going to be super important to make sure that it stays really clean. And then once I have that heat set and it's cooled off, I will use its coordinating die to cut it out, and then we'll get to building the card. So here I've laid it on the navy. I like that so much better. I feel like the red's really popping off of that, and the lighter color birds are working well with it. I love a navy with a gold. That's no secret. So now we can start putting them together. If I used any part of the leaf that matched the flower, like here with the bud, I am going to go ahead and glue those together so they look like one piece. This one is the one that we trimmed off, and I'm just kind of making my own little flower vine here that's going to go kind of up the right-hand side of the card. So I'm laying those out, and then I can reattach that bud wherever I would like for it to go, wherever I have like a gap that looks like it needs a flower, because remember, we've cut them apart and there may, it may have been fuller the way that it was originally drawn. Here, this, I use the My Sweet Petunia Precision Glue Press with the fine tip. Fine tips are super, super helpful with these lovely layers because you do sometimes have really delicate lines. So you don't have to have the precision glue press by any means, though I love it. But I would recommend having a finer glue tip. For the perch, I just trimmed off kind of the top part of it so that it will meet the gold part at the top without me having to tuck it underneath. So I'm putting the perch on top of the cage. Yes, I know you wouldn't be able to see all the perch, and yes, I know you wouldn't be able to see all the birds, but it is my card, and that's what I'm doing. I don't think it takes away from the beauty of the card. So I added glue to both of my birds, and then I kind of laid the one that will go on top down so that I could still tuck the other one behind. And then from there, it's pretty much just, laying my flowers back out. Those flowers that we put down first are behind the bird cage. These flowers will be in front of the bird cage. And then just utilizing, like I said, those leaves and that layout that we already have done, it keeps us from having to mess with all of like the little teeny tiny bits. Because you guys know I don't love that. I don't love arranging teeny tiny bits. But even though these roses come from two different sets and they're kind of done in two different styles, the vintage roses look more like a wild rose, where the sweetheart roses are definitely more of a classic rose shape. I think that they work really nicely together when they're, one, in the same color scheme, and two, all of the leaves are in the same color scheme. I think that you could see how maybe one would be a little bit more blooming open, where some would be a little bit smaller and a little bit more closed. And that just gives you another way. I mean, we're talking about cutting apart our die cuts, using them differently, getting more mileage. Don't forget to kind of mix the sets that you have, so that you can get even more different looks and even more out of your investment. So this larger one, I just kind of laid there because I'm going to tuck this larger leaf behind it, and that's going to kind of fill out the bottom. In order to have some balance, I am going to still put a rose kind of in the top left-hand corner, and then that's also where I'm going to put my sentiment, so that it will have a little bit more weight. To balance out that really heavy kind of right hand design that we have. I did not use any foam tape because we have so many layers of cardstock with the lovely layers. I didn't feel like I needed to add any foam tape, but if you wanted even more dimension, or you wanted your birds to be up even higher, you could definitely add foam tape and that would work just as well. I am going to add some shimmer to my flowers, and then I used I think it's the Americana rhinestones, which is funny because this isn't necessarily an Americana style card, but I really wanted these little white jewels, the little white rhinestones, to accent the sentiment and bring in another element of that white. And then this is the finished card. So I hope that this inspires you guys to see your die cuts differently and to get more out of what you have. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I always appreciate your time, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.